Um, okay, so let's think back to this diagram here that we had a look at yesterday. We have a typical client-server relationship, thinking about how web applications are working or any kind of request response cycle. We've been getting practice last week thinking about how do we write applications. And we've been using the pattern MVC to arrange our files and folders according to convention. Yesterday, we spent some time setting up a database, setting up one of these database servers, a Postgres database server, and creating individual databases and tables within them. And then we were interacting them both through our command line interface or through a graphical interface. And what we're going to focus on this morning is not Wednesday, this is today. No, we'll never know what day it is. So we're going to focus on this connection here, all right, from our application, which talks in Node.js, to the database, which we understand so far only talks in SQL. So how do we do this? What does this connection look like, and how do we send commands to our database from our Node application? And what we're going to use is we're going to use a new tool that is called an ORM. And its job is to convert Node.js into SQL when we need it to. So if we want to make an insert statement, we're going to find some way to write some Node.js that creates an insert statement and sends it to our database to execute. In the same way that we want to be able to make a select query, query our database and get data, and then use it in JavaScript. But we have a problem because that data in tables isn't really JavaScript, it's not objects and properties. So we have to go through some process that maps each row in a table into a JavaScript object. And this is the problem that this ORM is going to help us solve. How do we map the data in a table into JavaScript so we can manipulate it as we need to? Does that make sense as the problem that needs to be solved? Yeah, it's always good and always important to understand the problems tools help us solve. We can't just use tools without understanding why. So we can't access or query our database without some way to translate from Node.js into SQL and then represent that data in a table or in multiple tables using JavaScript. And there's a type difference, right? The table isn't an object, and the object in JavaScript isn't just table data. So we have to find a way to represent this. And we're going to use a tool that is an ORM. Now, ORMs exist pretty much for every object-oriented language or every relational database. There is some way to map the data in a table. For Node.js, there are a few different ORMs we could use, and we're going to be using, for this course, we're going to be using a tool called Sequelize. This is one implementation of an ORM. There are a few different tools like this. All right. So when you move on to different languages, you'll find different ORMs to use, but they all help solve the same problem. All right. So as we go through this week and next week, using this tool Sequelize, try and also think about not just the way that Sequelize implements it, but just some of the overarching ideas about how this ORM works. All right. Why we need it, and how does it help us solve this problem. So this is the context for the session this morning, focusing on this connection here. And we're going to play around with a very simple version of this and how can we connect to a database from a Node application. So I'm going to go through and demonstrate a couple simple things first, but the way that you're going to start this is navigate into this directory, in the workshops directory, object relational mapping. Make sure your local version of this is up to date. Install its dependencies, and then create the Catbook database. So the only thing that's important here is the name of it, and just create a new database. You might have to do this within the Postgres command line interface if you don't have access to this command. But you should be able to run createdb. Then, after you create the database, connect to it. And in the migrations directory, you'll see some SQL statements that you'll need to execute to bring your database up to the current state. So once you've created your local database for this project, there's only one statement at the moment that you need to create. And so I'll go through and demonstrate this step. First of all, we need to make sure we've installed the dependencies, and then you need to create the local database. And then we need to connect to it. So I'm now inside of my Postgres CLI, and I want to bring my database up to the current state. So at the moment, there are no tables. And so I want to run this command. So it shows me a create table as a successful indication of the command. And I should now be able to see that there is one table called cats. And inside this table, there are currently no rows. All right, it's an empty table. This is where you should be, having set up your database to begin with. And update your .n file. So we've seen a usage of the .n file a week or two ago. This is where we're going to keep environment variables. And the reason why we need to keep environment variables, I'll explain just in a second. So in your when you navigate into this, you'll see this file here, .m.example, and this is it's in version control, so we're not excluding it, we're not ignoring it, but the .n file will be, all right, and that's the reason why you don't see it here. The example here is just to show you how you need to format it. So there's an instruction here at the top on line 1, remove the .example from this file name, and then remove line 1. And then you have 3 different environment variables of the key database, database user, and database password. This is where you fill in as necessary to make sure that you can access your database. So whatever is your username and password that you usually use to access your database, make sure you add it in here, no spaces and no quotation marks, right? Just straight text, key value pairs. So it should end up looking something like from here. You should move to something like here, all right? Quite straightforward. It's just a .n file that holds your environment variables because we need to use them to connect to your database from our Node application. Okay, why? Well, we're using Sequelize, which is our ORM, and it needs a couple Postgres specific tools to help connect to it. So you can use Sequelize with other kinds of database. Remember, it's just a tool that helps map JavaScript to SQL, but the database itself needs its own set of drivers. So we use these 2 dependencies in addition to Sequelize. If you change your database, you still use Sequelize, but you would change these 2 things depending on what database you're using. And the reason we know how to use these things is when we go, you can have a look at the resource down here to sort of see how you start with Sequelize if you want to. And this gives you the instructions to install it. So you can see here, for different kinds of databases, you would install different drivers. All right, specific tools that help make sure that the commands execute successfully against different databases. So this is thinking about this ORM here, and Sequelize is also, you need two parts. You need the ORM itself, and then you need the specific driver for, say, for example, Postgres or MariaDB. And so you have to choose the right one to be able to execute successfully the command. All right. So we choose PG, not this one. And so after you set up your project to connect your development database, the point here is to get practice using JavaScript to create those queries that you've been doing manually yourself from your command line interface using the insert, the select, the update, and the delete. We want to get practice. All the things you did yesterday manually using SQL, now doing the same thing, but using JavaScript from your Node app. All right. So we'll have a look at that in a second. And basic queries is a resource down here that you'll probably use a lot just to make sure you're on the right track on how you write some of these queries. Now, we're going to walk through how Sequelize gets set up, how it connects to a database. And so a lot of this may seem is new, so I want you to not worry about that. We're going to practice this today. So you can see here, this is a simple insert query. Always fun to see the word simple in anything. And you can see on the left-hand side, you can navigate to insert queries or select queries or update or delete queries. And those are the ones I want you to practice. All right, how do you write an insert or a select or an update or delete using Sequelize? So in effect, it's as simple as finding the thing that you want to insert into a table and calling a create method. This is part of Sequelize. When you execute this, it will transform into an insert statement. Insert into the table users, and then it provides these are the values for the column names. These would have to map to the column names. These would be the values. So we're going to have a look at doing that together in a second. So this is the resource you'll use to sort of see how you can practice building your insert queries and your select queries and your update and your delete. The instructions here say to write the insert query, run the app to see it work, and then check your data in your table just to visually verify that you've added or changed data in your table. All right. So we know the moment the table's empty, so I want to be able to write an insert query. So let's go to my application and have a look at how it's working. So currently the goal is to write an insert query using Sequelize. Before we get to that, I want to walk through some of the things that this app is doing in order to get Sequelize to work. So we're going to start off with app.js. This is sort of the entry point to our application. This is the file that will run from our command line. Line 1 at the top here sets up our application to have access to our environment variables. It reads this file and adds them to the environment variable object. Line 3 stores in two const variables, models and Sequelize, the result of requiring the file models, or we will see it's not the file models, but requiring models. When you require models like this, it looks conventionally for a file called index.js. And so when you require models, it goes to this directory and loads this file here. So I'm actually going to draw this out, I think. So let's just try and walk through this. And this is something that I always encourage everyone to do whenever they see something new, is to sort of like walk through the code and diagram it out, draw lines and see like how things are working. All right. Don't be shy of going through a process of diagramming out a few lines of code and how different files relate to each other. All right. So we're going to start from app.js. The first thing it did was to require .env. All right. So you can do this in a number of different ways. Require.env, and you just give a description, loads envars, so we have access to them. And the next thing that happens is line 3, where we require the models directory. Dir is short for directory. So when this happens, let's have a look at it. So we require the models directory, and we start off with this file here, index.js. This is what we export at the bottom. We export an object that has 2 properties, Sequelize and models. So if you go back to app.js, you can see that models and Sequelize gets extracted from that object, and we have these 2 const variables, all right, that hold the values from those properties. So the point of this index.js is to export Sequelize and models. And what are these Sequelize? Well, let's start off at here. Sequelize, where does this come from? Sequelize is this const up here, which is an instance of new Sequelize. What is Sequelize? Well, Sequelize comes from line 1, where we require Sequelize. So let's go back to our diagram. The first thing that happens here is that we require the ORM tool. All right, let's add that here. So this allows us to have access to the ORM, or all the different methods and functions within Sequelize. The next thing that happens is that we create an instance of Sequelize, and this is the connection. This is the connection to our database, and this is where it grabs the values from our environment variables to make that connection to the database. So here is create the connection to the database. And we're storing it in this variable Sequelize. We're storing this object that holds the connection to the database, and we export it. And so we can use this connection, this object that holds the connection to the database, and we can use it in different parts of our application. And we also store in a models directory, store in a models variable, this object. And this object it consists of importing the module from cat. So this is, we'll have a look at next. So let's add this in here. Create models. In this case, we're just using our cat.js model. All right, sometimes we get confused between the difference between a model and a module. All right. In Node.js, everything is a module that you export or you require. A model is different, and the way that we're going to use the word model, and we've already used the word model in lots of different cases, but in this case, in this scenario, we're using model, something that represents a table. All right. So in the same way that we know that we have a cats table here, this model cat represents this table. We'll have a look at it in a second, just hold on. So this models goes through objects and then imports this cat file. All right, and we pass it this Sequelize connection. And we also pass it some data from the ORM tool. All right. So if I add in here, create models, we're going to pass in the connection and also stuff from the ORM tool. All right, these two things here. This allows this file, this require statement to work appropriately. And then we export both of them. So the point of the index.js file, the point of this file is to create the connection and make sure our models, the things that represent our tables, are ready. All right, so this is like the initialization of all of our models. So the index.js file is important in the models directory for Sequelize to understand what are your models that you want to have in your application and what is the connection to the database. There'll be additional things we might put in this file at some point. So when we require the model, what happens? Well, this is essentially the description of your table. And you can see here that represents the table in your database. It has 3 different columns here. It has a name, a breed, and an owner. And it has the string type, which will get converted to the variable character type in the Postgres database with a limit of 60 characters. And the exact way to format this, you don't need to worry about so much because we can have a look at the documentation on Sequelize to understand how to format this. But essentially, it's just a function that returns an object, and the object is the cat. It passes in the Sequelize connection, which is why we have access to this define method if this comes from Sequelize, these 2 arguments, because remember we pass it in here. Okay, so let's go back to our diagram. We create our models we pass this information back. So we pass back the connection to the database and our models. So we pass back the connection to the database and our models. And when we go back to the app.js, this all happens on line 3. So this then goes back all the way to app.js. So by running app.js, you set up the application to create the connection to the database, create the models that you need, and then your application has access to them and can use them. As a result, we can then manipulate them and create or use them to create our SQL queries. So, for example, let's do the insert statement, and let's uncomment these to have a look at what's going on. So. Let's go back to the documentation again, just to double check. I'm trying to write an insert statement. I'm going to use a create function, function on my object cat. The way that I get at my cat is because I've required the models, and I have access to the models because it has a cat object. Let's go back and have a look at that. So my models is an object that has cat. So when I export the models object, it has a property cat. All right, the value is the exported cat. All right, represents the table. So I access my cat and I go cat.create, and this creates the insert statement. And then if I want to do my select query, I can use a find all method from Sequelize. It looks at the table, executes a find all, select everything from cats where owner is Ed. All right, and then because I want to log them to my console so I can actually visually see them, I'm going to have a look at what the select query looks like, and then take that first item from it and then log the cat name. All right, so let's actually have a look at this now. So if I run this, you'll see here that there are a couple things that are happening here. You can see the insert into cats. This is the create statement that up here that just happened. So you can have a look at the way that Sequelize is converted into JavaScript. Converts JavaScript into SQL. And then the select is the find all here. So the find all method gets converted into a select query, where owner is equal to Ed. So I then log the result of the select, which is an array of cat objects. So this is Sequelize looking at that data from the table and turning it into JavaScript, which I can access with some other information. And then I want to get at the first cat and then just log the name. So this would be the first object, and I log cat.name, and I get back Tabitha. So I can also verify visually in my Postgres client. If I run another select query, I can see that I have added data to my table. So there's a bunch of new syntax, but I want you to follow what's already here. You can uncomment the current way to create and insert into your table and have a look at how it works. So first step is write this insert statement and get it working. And then to go through update and delete and do the same thing. Try and use Sequelize to update a record in the cats table, to delete a record, and visually inspect using your command line interface to see are those changes happening as you expect. All right. So this is this instruction here, and then as much as you can, find time to visualize how this current application is working. All right, you can do something similar to this, understand the order in which things are happening, and you can find different ways to do it. And find a way to just understand the different stages that are happening, so you can visualize it in your head. Okay. So this is where I want everyone to get to this morning. You're going to pair up and you're going to work on this together until 11 a.m. And then we'll get back together and do a Q&A for anything that you uncovered as you went through this session, writing your select, update, and delete queries. Any questions before you all pair up? A couple of shakes in the head. Does it make sense what the current task is? Cool. All right, I'm going to stop this recording for the moment.